Not that somebody was crucified 2,000 years ago and that makes it all right for us. We can just do whatever we like now. There were teachings. Are we living those teachings? And we can talk about that today. How's everybody feeling? Relaxed now? Little centered? Anybody have a stressful morning getting here? Oh, I certainly did. Yeah, there we go. So I get out of the house, I lock it up, I'm in my car. Better check that I have my cell phone. So I'm in my purse. I can't feel my cell phone. I look and it's bright pink, so I can't really miss it, or can you? And I'm looking in the purse. I've left it inside again. So I open up the door, one of my housemates' dogs come up and they want snacks and stuff. And I get into the bedroom and I look where it's going to be, which of course is the charging station, and is it there? No, it's not there. So maybe when the alarm went off in the morning on the cell phone, I picked it up, put it in the bed. So I'm taking sheets off the bed and I'm getting nowhere. It fell on the floor. So I'm down on my knees. And since I'm down on my knees, I think now is the time to pray. Isn't it interesting? Most of the time we don't pray about God, but right now I need my cell phone. Room service, I need God. Please help me with this. And the way I do it is a little trick you might want to try. I just center myself inside and go reveal, reveal, reveal. What's the revelation? What is it going to be revealed to me? And then a thought came to me. Why don't I look again at my purse? So I take it, I shake it. You know where this is going. I shake it out of the bed, and there's my cell phone. I mean, it's amazing to me. It's totally ironic because I can remember things in detail from my childhood. I can't remember what I did with my cell phone this morning. Anybody else find that? Remember things from the past?
Thanks very much.
Anybody seen these ads on TV for 50s music? We remastered the great songs of the 50s. And then they sing along, and I'm singing, and about the 5th or 6th song that comes on, I'm realizing, I know every word. My head is filled with trivia from the 50s, and probably the 60s too. Anybody else experience that thing? I mean, how useful is it to me today?
80s.
80s. Oh, yeah. You're so young, Ron.
No, disco.
Disco. Oh my goodness me. But anyway, I remember all that stuff. But how useful is it for me to know that it was indeed an itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini that she wore to the beach for the first time today? For those of you way too young for this, that was not phrases in the songs. So I remember that, but I also remember nursery rhymes. I remember fables. You remember fables? Aesop's fables? He was actually Greek. Yeah. Do you remember one? The Mouse and the Lion.
Oh, you guys.
Anybody else? Anybody else remember any fables?
Fox and the Grape.
Yeah, there we go. And one that's very familiar to people, the tortoise and the hare. Remember the tortoise and the hare?
Yeah.
For those that don't know the story, and by the way, these are stories told to children. So we learned as kids that the hare is like, hey, I'm so cool and I'm so fast, and you're just a tortoise. It was probably a guy who was the hare and the girl. And so they have a race. The tortoise says, I'll have a race. No problem, says the hare. He runs off, and he gets inside the finish line, and he sees a comfy little grassy, leafy area near a tree, and says, I'm going to have a little nap, because I'll see this slow coach come up when she comes by. And wakes up about an hour later, and there's the tortoise crossing the finish line. What's the moral of that story? Steady, slow and steady wins the race. More haste, less speed. So there's a moral to it. So yes, go on.
I says, take time to smell the flowers.
But don't let them make you fall asleep. So that's just that's a fable. A fable, a story told to kids. Why? In everyday words. We've been studying Proverbs on Bible Bites. On Wednesdays, we do, for newcomers, we do something called Bible Bites, and we study the Bible. One of the things we're looking at is Proverbs. So we might just have in there more haste, less speed. But that doesn't mean so much to a kid, so we give it in everyday terms. What do we call it when it's not about an animal, or a plant, or an inanimate object, it's about a person? It's called a parable. We heard today 2 parables. Did you know there were parables in the Old Testament? There's actually 7. 3 of them in Ezekiel, 2 of them in Ezekiel 17, the chapter that we read today. So I'm going to talk about those. So why did Jesus Christ spoke in parables? How many did he speak? Do you know? Guess. Hazard a guess. 10, 20? Actually 46, which is a lot. Mainly you'll find them in Matthew and Luke. Mark was a less read gospel. I mean, it's the history, but it starts at the baptism, ends at the crucifixion. Most of the rest of it is in Matthew and Luke. Nothing in John. John isn't the mystic. John talks directly about the kingdom of God. And most of the Jesus parables are about the realm of the Spirit, the kingdom of God. When we say gospel, we mean the word good news. So this is journalism of the time, except it's not very recent journalism. We've got Mark writing here. We had John the other Sunday, but now we're in Mark. We're in the 3rd year of Mark. Since Vatican II, the Catholic Church said we're going to have a liturgical year. Here we are in ordinary time. We're not in a special time, but we'll spend the whole year on either Matthew, Mark, or Luke, with occasional bits of John. Then our congregations are going to learn all about it. So we're in Mark. And Mark is really the historian, just telling the facts. And so let's just parse out that reading a little bit, shall we? The reign of God is like this. The reign, the realm. If you go to the King James or some of the older translations, you're going to hear the kingdom. Isn't that interesting? Here we go. Patriarchal society again. Kingdom. The actual word is a feminine noun in the Greek, which is basileia. And it really means the area, the realm of. So here we are. The reign of God is like this. Notice the present tense. When Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, we call it the kingdom. Jesus is our older brother, our kin. We are all children of God. We have the divinity inside of us. If we are willing and able to look and find it and take a breath. So in the present tense, it's not something we're going to die to get. It's not something that's out there on a cloud and there's thrones and there's angels. It's actually very simple. And Jesus uses the parable to speak spiritual things. And have you ever got out of a dream and said, oh my God, I get this great insight, or a meditation, I got this great, but I can't really describe it. What was it? Anybody ever had that experience? A few people, yeah. It's difficult to talk about spiritual things. In a sense, you're lying because you're always going around this subject because it's not, our brains, we can't see ultraviolet light or infrared. Our material senses, our external senses are limited to some of the stuff of this world. We have to go into our hearts and see with spiritual eyes to get hard. So this is what Jesus is trying to get us to do. A sower scatters seed on the ground, then goes to bed at night and gets up day after day. It's ordinary time. It's everyday life he's talking about. The seed sprouts and grows. Crop by itself. By itself it produces the crop. The blade, the ear, the ripe wheat. The actual word in the Greek at the end of the grow by itself is the word automate. It's missed out from some translations. In the inclusive version that we look at, it's in there. That's where automation comes from. It's going to happen. The realm of God is going to happen whether you get on board or not. So this is Jesus' message. Get on board. It's going to happen regardless. When the crop is ready, the sower wields the sickle, for the time is right for harvest. Now, a lot of scholars say, oh, this is the judgment coming. This is the day of judgment. And no, we just harvest. That's the thing that we do next. So be aware of that. Anybody here know the day and the hour and the minute of their death? No. We don't. So let's be ready. Better get on board. The reign of God, and then he goes, is like a mustard seed. It's not the smallest seed these days, but these are mustard seeds. Thank you, Home Depot. I don't know if you can see them. These are tiny little things. Tiny, tiny little seeds. Somebody wants to see them, we can catch them later. tiny seed. Why the mustard seed? Why not the great cedars of Lebanon or oak trees? Or why the mustard seed? The mustard seed in those days was considered a weed. It's a shrub. It's not a tree. But it grows from this to 10 to 12 foot high. And it's all over the Sahara area and into the Middle East. All over the place. Mustard seed, very familiar, and it's a big difference. This little, almost invisible little dot becomes a 10 to 12 foot high. And it grows, and it's going to happen regardless. With branches big enough for the birds of the sky, eyes on the sparrow, birds of the sky to build nests in its shade. That's everyone, that's us. This ain't just a message for the Jews. People of the time, it's believed, with historians, just thought, this is for, no. This isn't just Yahweh, this is God of everyone. So big enough for the build nests in its shade. And shade is really important. We live in the desert. We know what shade is needed in the summer. They live in the desert. Using many parables like these, Jesus spoke the message to those who have ears to hear. You'll hear that all over Matthew and Luke, particularly Matthew. You'll also hear it in the Nag Hammadi Gospels. Some of you studied the Nag Hammadi Gospels with me earlier this year. Some of which scholars believe predate Mark, that was the first of the Gospels, maybe 40, 50, it's debated, years after the crucifixion. Everything was spoken in parables, but Jesus explained it. Now, all due respect to the disciples, the guys who were the disciples, there were also female disciples, but the church kind of wrote that out of history, the early Christian church. But they were fishermen. These guys were not the sharpest tools in the shed, right? God bless them. So Jesus explained it to them. But he did it, but he also did it in ways. Some scholars would say he actually hid some of the teachings. A, so you have to work to find them. And B, so the Pharisees don't see immediately what you're telling them to do, so they run off to the Romans and get you crucified before you're ready to get crucified. So that's in the gospel. The mustard seed and many more. That same gospel that same chapter contains other parables. Let's turn to Ezekiel. Who knows anything about Ezekiel? I mean, this is not Isaiah, it's not Jeremiah. We don't hear a lot about Ezekiel. Chapter 2, verse 1, stand up, O son of man, and I will speak to you. God gives him a scroll, he swallows it. He has visions. He's a prophet, and he speaks in parables. Yeah. He was a prophet. He was born about 622 BC. He was a contemporary of Jeremiah. He and Jeremiah were exiled into Babylon when Nebuchadnezzar sacked the temple and took it over. He was probably about 30 years old when he went to Babylon, and about 5 years before he started prophesying. And he prophesied, and in this chapter, that prophecy precedes the reading. I did the positive reading. There's invariably in these kinds of Old Testament parables some bad news and some good news. So I left out the bad news. The bad news is the story of the eagles and the vine. There's an eagle called Nebuchadnezzar. He's fighting the Assyrians. The Egyptians are on the side of the Assyrians. The Jews are on the side of the Egyptians. So Nebuchadnezzar doesn't like that. Takes over Jerusalem, gets rid of Jehoiakim, who was the king of Jerusalem, and puts in Zedekiah, still in the line of David, still legitimate king of Jerusalem. And remember, at that time, this wasn't called Israel, this was called Judah. There was a northern part of Israel called Israel, and a southern part called Judah. Why? Because the northern part were like the Canaanites. They worship idols. We all know what the biggest sin is in the Old Testament: idolatry. So they worshipped idols. The good guys were down in Jerusalem worshipping in the ways of God. This is what Sovereign Yahweh says: I myself will take a shoot from the top of a cedar and plant it. That's the line of David. I will break off a tender sprig. Could this be Jesus? Break off a tender sprig from its topmost shoots, from the elite, and plant it on a lofty and high mountain at Zion. Jerusalem is on Mount Zion. Thus reuniting north and south of Israel. It will grow branches, bear fruit, all kinds of birds. Once again, everyone will nest in it. They will find shelter. Everyone will know that I am Yahweh. You know, in the Old Testament, it gets pretty kind of hot and heavy about it. Look, I'm Yahweh. You better get on board. And I will do this. And later on in chapter 18 of Ezekiel, we hear that he creates a covenant. A covenant. Ezekiel says God is creating a covenant with us, and he says, feed the hungry. That sound familiar from Matthew? Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless. Have compassion as your loving God is compassion, as Luke puts it. So what? So what to these parables? Ever so small beginnings lead to great things. What are you going to do to nurture that seed inside you, to become the great cedar, to get beyond the mustard seed? You know, we may be in church today thinking spiritual things. Well, what are you going to do this afternoon or this evening or next week? Are you going to get distracted by the material senses? Back to the Gospel of Mary in the Nag Hammadi Gospels. Look, over there, people, Jesus saying, look, people over there, there's things to look at, there's things, shiny objects. We know a little bit about that in the way TV is today. There's all these distractions. Be who you are, center yourself, the divinity is inside. The kingdom of God is within you. So, what kind of wealth do you want to build up? Our lives are just a little speck in time of all eternity. While we're here, don't we want to be who we really are? Not to wait after some transition to come into the heaven, but to find it inside ourselves. It's inside. Inside. Be compassionate as your loving God is compassionate. It's not someplace in the future. It's right here, right now. It's inside each one of us. The kingdom is found in the place of your compassion. It is found in the place of your loving. Go inside. Listen to your spiritual heart. Take a moment to turn away from the material senses into who you are. It is found in the place of your generosity. It is found in the place of your healing of yourself and others. Pull up inside you. Bless the material senses. Bless what you see. Bless the words you hear. Bless the food you eat. Be thankful for the clothing you have. Have compassion on this planet. It has need of it. But it can only come from someone who carries compassion. You carry compassion. Exercise it through your senses, and you'll walk through the world karmically free. Baruch Hashem, which means thanks be to God. Amen. Amen.
That say
Amen.